Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Turkey and US are intensifying dialogue for a smooth and coordinated withdrawal of the American troops from Syria.
Turkey and the US are intensifying dialogue for a smooth and coordinated withdrawal of the American troops from Syria. The Turkish presidency said President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and US President Donald Trump agreed to establish military and diplomatic coordination in a phone call on Sunday. The coordination is expected to prevent an authority vacuum as the United States withdraws from Syria. A military delegation is expected to be in Turkey in the coming days, while Trump's national security advisor John Bolton will be in the Turkish capital after the new year. Turkey-US working groups will meet in Washington, D.C. on January 8th, in which all aspects of bilateral ties, as well as Syria, will be on the table. The White House also announced on Monday that President Erdoğan invited US President Trump to visit Turkey in 2019. In his surprise trip to Iraq on Wednesday, Trump defended his decision to withdraw US forces from Syria and said that Turkish President Erdoğan has agreed to take out any remnants of the Islamic State left in Syria. The trip to Iraq was announced on Twitter by Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. It's the US president's first such visit since taking office nearly 2 years ago.
President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has slammed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as a tyrant after Netanyahu called Erdoğan an anti-Semitic dictator this week.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also implied that the Turkish occupation of Cyprus and Israel's occupation of Palestine are the same. By accusing Turkey of invasion in Cyprus, the Israeli Prime Minister may have confused his language. Rather, he wanted to say that they are invading Palestine and murdering women and children, Erdoğan said in Istanbul on Sunday. President Erdoğan added that Netanyahu is banging on the wrong door. Erdoğan is the voice of the oppressed. You are the voice of the tyrants. Netanyahu, you are the tyrant. Turkey is fighting terrorists. Israeli slaughterers have no right to blame anyone if they do not give their own account first. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu joined the war of words and called Netanyahu a cold-blooded killer of modern times. Erdoğan's remarks were a response to a tweet posted by Netanyahu earlier in the day, in which he criticized the Turkish presence in the north of Cyprus. Erdoğan, the occupier of northern Cyprus, whose army massacres women and children in Kurdish villages inside and outside Turkey, should not preach to Israel. The Israeli leader's allegation that Erdoğan is an anti-Semitic dictator was made in a speech to Israeli soldiers in Tel Aviv.
Joining us today to talk about the new era in Trump-Erdoğan relations is Mr. Soli Özel, who is a lecturer at Kadir Has University, Istanbul. Good afternoon, Mr. Özel. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Good afternoon, Medyascope.
So my first question is, what do you think will change in Turkey-US relations after Trump's very sudden decision to fully withdraw from Syria?
Well, Trump has surprised everyone, and that includes his closest associates in security and foreign policy matters when he sent his famous tweet on the 19th of December. That, I think, took the one of the most important hot potatoes in Turkish-American relations off coal, if you will, so to say. But I think this reflected an already well-established inclination on the part of American policymakers that they would rather work with Turkey than with the PYD, the Kurdish troops that they had fought alongside in order to beat the Islamic State. And Trump just upped the ante, so to say, because the original idea was to keep the American troops in Syria, but incline more towards Turkey. Now, Turkey was given, if you will, a blank check, although we now understand that the blank check is being also filled by other actors. But Trump was also, I suppose, convinced by his associates to declare that even if they were not in Syria, their air power in Iraq could very well be used to do bombardments of the Islamic State or to continue their fight within Syria as well. So we have a different game. Obviously, Turkey and the United States have come closer on this particular issue. The Turkish reaction was actually a very joyful reaction. But now there are, as I said, there are other actors, and we have to now deal with the Syrian regime, its relations with the PYD troops on the ground, what the Arab tribes and other elements are going to do, and of course, much more importantly than anything else, perhaps, is Russia's reaction. And in that sense, the visit to Moscow by the quartet of Turkey foreign minister, defense minister, head of intelligence, and the spokesperson of the presidency is obviously going to be a very important meeting to watch.
And, considering what has happened so far since the decision was first announced by Trump, do you think it's been a kind of foreign policy achievement as far as Turkish government is concerned?
Well, it was an achievement in the sense that Turkey wanted this to happen, and it did happen, although in a very surprising way. And if we're to believe what was leaked from the telephone conversation of December 14, 2 weeks ago, in the American press, the Turkish president had to tell Donald Trump, the American president, that they should not withdraw precipitously. Because obviously, however much Turkey may have wanted the American troops to withdraw, a sudden withdrawal creates a void, and that is pretty destabilizing in an already pretty unstable environment. But that move suggested, as I said, that the American authorities made a decision to side with Turkey, and Trump decided to take on that position and put, if you want, a lot of either responsibility or burden on Turkey. He tweeted that he was expecting, or he was promised, that Turkey would be taking on the Islamic State, and therefore everybody had to make a judgment and then assess the new situation and then recalibrate their positions accordingly. And this is what we're seeing as far as I'm concerned.
Today we also saw the breaking news that Manbij was taken under control of the Syrian army once again. So how do you think Russia will respond to all of this?
Well, I think the Russians have made their positions as clear as possible by now. Foreign Minister Lavrov on Monday said that Turkish troops in Idlib were there because they had the assent of the central government, of the regime in Damascus, which I guess implied that if you want to go into northeastern Syria, you'd still have to have the assent of the regime in Damascus. And then they also declared that Zaharova, there's the spokesperson of the ministry, said that they would expect, or that it would be only normal if the regime's troops have actually taken over those places that the Americans were going to vacate. So it is not just a decision, or it's not just a give and take between Turkey and the United States. There are plenty of other actors, and that was not, I guess, dealt with in the Turkish debate, and it is now becoming apparent that we cannot look at the east of the Euphrates River, what will happen in the northeast of Syria, without taking into consideration other players and thinking that it is just between Turkey and the United States, with PYD playing the extras, if you will.
Mr. Özel, thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Özel, thank you very much for joining us. Today we were joined by Soli Özel, and now we continue with our next news video.
Islamic theology scholar and Karar Daily columnist Mustafa Öztürk announced his intention to leave Turkey and move abroad last week due to the threats he has been receiving. Professor Öztürk, who is a lecturer at Marmara University's Faculty of Theology, has said, It seems like the only way to continue scholarly work and express different views is to work at a university abroad. At a conference in Istanbul, Öztürk has also said, "I feel that I can no longer breathe in this country. I am not a secularist. I am not a Democrat. I am an Islamist, but I cannot breathe among Muslims." Meanwhile, well-known Turkish journalist Ismail Saymaz reported that in a WhatsApp group comprised of the country's leading theologians, one of the scholars proposed that Öztürk should be questioned by top Islamic scholars and slain unless he repents. Öztürk, who is closer to the historicist school, which stands in contrast with traditional Islamic law, received fierce criticism among some circles due to his view that the literal wording of the Quran actually belongs to the Prophet.
Labor Minister Zehra Zümrüt Selçuk announced on Tuesday that the minimum wage will increase by 26% in 2019.
The monthly minimum wage in Turkey has been raised to 2,020 Turkish liras, the equivalent of $381, by a commission made up of the Labor Ministry and Trade and employer unions led by the Family, Labor and Social Services Minister Zehra Zümrüt Selçuk. It's an increase of 26% compared with last year. The decision has been made unanimously, Minister Selçuk said in a press briefing on Tuesday to announce the hike in the minimum wage. Ergün Atalay, chair of the Confederation of Turkish Trade Unions, Turkish, said they had targeted to pass the threshold of 2,000 liras. "We aimed at a sufficient wage for a humanly life. This level of wage is not perfect, but it is a better one," he said. Aksenel Koç, the General Secretary of the Turkish Confederation of Employer Associations, TİSK, said, "We have a common responsibility in the matter of Turkey's sustainable development. In Turkey, around 24% of the workforce earns the minimum wage."
Famous Turkish actors Metin Akpınar and Müjdat Gezen were briefly detained on Monday over insulting President Erdoğan.
Well-known Turkish comedians Metin Akpınar and Müjdat Gezen, who were accused of insulting President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and inciting an uprising in a television program last week, were taken in by the police for questioning. The two comedians were released on conditional bail after they were summoned to give statements to prosecutors. Both actors will have to report to a police station once a week and are banned from leaving Turkey. The investigation came hours after President Erdoğan suggested that Akpınar and Gezen should be brought to account for this by the judiciary. "We cannot leave this business without giving a response. You think you can hang the president of this country? Now go and pay your price at the judiciary," the president said. In a TV program on Halk TV last week, 77-year-old Akpınar had stated the following: "I believe that the only solution for us to get rid of this polarization is democracy. If we can't reach that point, then perhaps the leader will be hanged from his feet like it happened in all other fascist governments of the past, or he will be poisoned in a dungeon, or face the end of all other similar leaders, but it will be ultimately our own destruction." Gezen, for his part, attacked Erdoğan for pointing his finger at everybody and warned the president to know his limit. The main opposition Republican People's Party (CHP) and Good Party have condemned President Erdoğan for targeting prominent comedians Metin Akpınar and Müjdat Gezen. The probe is still ongoing, and the actors will be formally charged after an indictment is prepared by the prosecutor. Meanwhile, following the formal request of President Erdoğan's lawyers, the Supreme Board of Radio and Television ordered a halt to the program on Halk TV for 5 episodes, while also ruling for a fine over the remarks of the comedians. The board also ruled a 3-episode ban and a fine on the daily news show of private broadcaster Fox TV over anchorman Fatih Portakal's statements earlier in the month. President Erdoğan had slammed Portakal, accusing the anchorman for calling the people to the streets. While discussing the Yellow Vest protest in France and the role of democracy, Portakal had said that peaceful protest is a natural right, but could not be practiced now because the people fear.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
Based on the Tevye and his daughter's tales written in Yiddish language, Fiddler on the Roof is one of the running shows on Broadway and is coming to Zorlu PSM with its own production tonight. Having won 9 Tony Awards with its Broadway performances, the musical was staged in 1969 for the first time in Turkey by the Ankara State Opera and Ballet. One of the most notable contemporary jazz artists worldwide, Sasha Boutros, will perform in Istanbul tonight. Grammy-nominated Boutros will be meeting with jazz lovers at the Cemal Reşit Rey Concert Hall.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.